This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. Welcome, welcome. I am in fact, old gingerface Steve Gould. Thank you for being here, guys. Thank you for everybody who's found the show, who's ripping through the back content. I took a couple weeks off and still getting tons of downloads a day. I so appreciate that. I'm so glad that people are finding value and listening to the great men and women of law enforcement and just listening to their stories, totally unedited, hearing exactly what they have to deal with on the job, and gaining a better appreciation for what that is with the climate the last few years. It's really good to get a reality check and listen to just the craziness that goes on behind closed doors, even in the smallest communities, other countries, things like that. So thank you. The rating and reviewing is appreciated. If you want to keep doing that, Apple Podcasts is great. Spotify, wherever you listen, that would be wonderful. If you can't become a Patreon member, that's where you get a rank. You can choose a rank and get direct access to me, and I'll mail you a sticker. Hold on. Oh, come on. There it is. One of these bad boys, a 3x3 nylon sticker. I will send you, and if you choose the sergeant ranking, I will shout you out during the episode, thanking you that way. If you can't afford it or it's not in the cards right now, I totally understand. Don't worry about it. The show will remain free as always, and just do the rating and reviewing. That would be fantastic as well. We're over 1,000 on Apple, which is what I always wanted. So I'm not going to harp on it too much, but more is always appreciated. Side note, somebody wrote something on a review for the podcast, claiming that I was like a homophobe and I was racist. These things that just weren't true, and they were saying they were saying that I said things during the podcast that proved that. So obviously not true. If you listen to the show, you know that's not true. Never talk hatefully about people at all. So I actually wrote to Apple, and everybody told me, like other people had podcasts, were like they're not going to do anything about it. They never ever take down a rating, because this was a 1-star rating, and it was right at the top, calling me like a homophobe and a bigot. And I was like, this has to go away. This is not true. And this was also the same time when I was kind of interviewing with the Discovery Channel to do that show that I did, Exposed Naked Crimes, which you can check out on HBO Max or Discovery Investigation. So I was kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh, someone's like sabotaging me. So I wrote them the letter. They actually took it down, which is, I heard this never, ever happens. They took down the negative review, which is phenomenal. So I thought, like, when you write a letter to Apple, it like goes into a black hole and you never think they're even going to read it, but evidently they did. And they must have listened and found out it wasn't true, and they took it down. So thank you, Apple. I appreciate that. I never thought you would even do that, especially for a genre like this that's not super popular with everybody. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But guys, today, finally have an Australian copper on the show, and he's got fantastic stories and just a fantastic career. I'm so excited. I've told you before, I've tried to have Australian police officers on, and it's very difficult for them, especially if they're active. I got as far at one point where I was talking with a gentleman, really nice guy, and he was like, my command staff wants you to write a formal letter and like lay out X, Y, and Z. And I was like, oh man, I can't do that. It's too much. I mean, I think you guys know I say it all the time, but I work usually 70 hours a week, and I just don't want to get wrapped up with promising somebody's command staff it's going to go a certain way and then have them get pissed off and discipline somebody. So it never happened. It just never happened. But gentleman reached out to me. He has 31 years on the Victoria Police in Australia. 26 of those years he spent remote in the bush, ladies and gentlemen, way out there. And I talk about how I'm a rural cop now. Like I am in Western Mass. I do policing for a couple small communities, and like there's little foothills and there's lots of forest and not a ton of people, but I can drive 5 or 10 minutes to a city of 80,000 people. Like that's remote for where I'm at. This guy, and he'll let you know about it, is remote, like no backup whatsoever. He retired what they call a lead senior constable, and he's written a book about his adventures called Backup is 3 Hours Away. Without further ado, let me bring on the great Mark Tregellas. Mark!
Stephen, great to be here. Great to be on the show.
I'm so happy to have you, brother. And scheduling this was bizarre because it's, 16-hour difference. So it's actually, right now, it's Tuesday in the morning, right?
And so I just had breakfast not that long ago, and I'm thinking about what to do with the rest of my day after I finish chatting to you.
And is it summer down there? Summer down there, right?
It is indeed, and the town where I live, there's only 1,000 people in it normally, but over summer it grows to about 10,000. So at the moment, everybody hates going in to get a pint of milk at the supermarket because normally you just leave the money on the front counter and yell at someone and walk out, and now you've got to queue up for about 10 minutes. So
right.
Most people prefer it when there aren't so many tourists here.
Right, the humanity. 10-minute wait. Who could stand it? I love it. I love it, man. So you were an Australian police officer for that long, and in Australia, there's in the States, there's a lot of layers. There's on the most minute way it can be in a state, you could have village, town or municipal. You could have city. You could have state, county. And then at the top level, we don't have a uniformed police department. We have like the FBI or the Secret Service are uniformed in DC. But for Australia, it's a little bit simpler, right? Is it more like Canada or Ireland where there's like a national police?
So there are really only two police forces. There are state police and there is the federal police, but they're very much delineated. So in the States, state law rules, and if there is a homicide within the state of Victoria, the Victorian Homicide Squad will investigate. If a person who commits that murder goes across the border into the next state of New South Wales and commits a murder, then that state's homicide squad will investigate. The Australian Federal Police operate very, very differently to the FBI. They operate on overseas embassies. They do overseas deployments when they're asked to, and they will also do Commonwealth areas, which are airports and the family law courts. So you have a lot of other enforcement agencies, but it's only the police forces that are armed. So fisheries, national parks, border security at the airports, they aren't armed, but Australian Federal Police are also stationed there, and they are. So it's a very different setup.
Yeah, little different. Do you guys have Aboriginal police?
So in areas where there is quite a high area of Aboriginal, there are officers that will work with Northern Territory or Western Australian police forces, and that will come in, and they will come into town. So they will assist police officers, but normally they are only there to translate language if there's a problem, and also to look at cultural issues that come into it. So, but if they need to be charged with anything, it'll be the police force that will do it. Okay.
I have so many questions for you, Mark. So when Australian policeman, you want to become a police officer in Australia, you choose to go state, which would be like the normal, like police officer, right? That would be like the standard. What you would consider like the police there is like the state police. What's the background application process like? What's the academy like?
So, and I can only really talk about Victoria, although they're very similar across the states. So I do know that the federal police, although it's not mandatory, they do like you having a diploma or degree at university before you apply for them. In the state police in Victoria, you have to be minimum of 18 years of age. You need a driver's license, have to be an Australian citizen, and you go through a selection process where there are physical requirements, there is written requirements where they'll get you to write out a statement. You'll then have to go through a personal interview, and you'll then go to a dedicated police academy. That is 4 months, I believe, although it was very different because my experience was over 30 years ago now.
Right.
And
is it Sleepover Academy?
Yes. When I was in, now I think people who come in from the country can stay at the academy, but if you live local, you can go home and then come back the next day. So the Victoria Police Academy is extremely good. There's fitness areas. There are you'll have mock-ups of courts within the premises. You'll have shooting galleries there where they're able to do it, and also school lecturing room setups that are there. At the end of that, you are then sent out, and for the next 2 years, you undergo not an apprenticeship, but you are sent around to different areas. That has changed massively in the 31 years. When I was in, I believe it was probably a better way to go. And what happened was we became a probationary constable extended training scheme, and you spent a little bit of time in every single department within the police force. So I would spend about a month in fingerprints, with detectives, with highway patrol, with the community policing squads that look at children and domestic offences. You would also look at going to D24, where you would be on the radios giving out dispatches, and then you would be working in the fingerprint and the criminal history area. So by the end of your 2 years, you had a pretty good understanding of how everything worked within the force, and an idea of where you wanted to go within it. The only thing you didn't get to do are some of the specialist jobs, such as the dog squad, search and rescue, and the special operations group. Okay.
And was your police academy, was it high stress, paramilitary, like shouting and punitive exercise and all that stuff?
Nowhere near probably what was in there. I don't think I ever had anyone shouting at me. There was marching. There was a lot of physical requirements. One of the issues they said when you went into it, and I should state, I came out of the Australian military into the police force, and I was probably at the fittest I'd ever been prior to going in, and everybody in the academy was complaining about the food, but compared to military food, it was outstanding. And I started to lose physical condition because I was eating so much when I went in. And the guys said, listen, you're meant to get fitter when you're here, not get less fit. So can you maybe not try as hard at the start, and then by the end of it, you'll make us look good? And we went, sure, no worries. That's
we need to show a progression upward here.
Yes.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, my dad was the same way my dad was in the Navy in the Vietnam era, and he said everybody at boot camp complained about the food. He loved it. You know, they called it shit on a shingle. He'd go up for seconds. He's like, oh, I loved it. I don't know what it was, but he's just a big eater. But that's funny. So you go through the academy, you take a tour of the departments, the different branches, what everything does, which is very cool. If an agency has the ability to do that, that's really cool. And then you get your designation. Like, do you get to put in like a numbered list, like I'd like to be here, like where you'd like to be, or do they just tell you this is where we need coppers, this is where you're going?
So that has changed over the years, but it is quite interesting. It's very hard to find police that are willing to go remote country. The reason for that is that it's very hard to get promotion when you go remote country. If you want a career with promotion, you really have to stay in the city, in the capital city of Melbourne. If you're looking for lifestyle, which was more than what I was after, then you can go country. So when a person now graduates from the police academy, they can apply to go to a certain area. They might have, first, second, and third choice as to what they want to do. But if they don't get that, there is the possibility of being sent to a country station. You can also elect to go to stations that are very hard to find police for. And if you do that for a 2-year period, then when a vacancy comes up at a station you want to go to, you go to the top of the list. So there is also a possibility of, if you wish to transfer to somewhere and there is an outstanding reason, for example, you have elderly parents that are ill and you would like to move to that area in order to help them, then that can be arranged as well.
Okay, very cool. So it sounds like you went in, you knew what you wanted to do. You wanted to be remote. Like how remote are we talking? Like, are you like an adventurous type of guy that wanted to live off grid and raise a family out there? Or are we talking like villages that had like just like bare bones accommodations?
So it was really interesting. In the old days, the state government used to provide houses and flats for remote area police officers, but unfortunately they were sold, and now you have to try and find your own accommodation, which makes it really hard in areas that are popular, like seaside towns, where rent is really difficult to come by. So they come into there and you're trying to, a lot of places can't find police to come to them because they can't find accommodation. So when I first moved to the country, it was fairly easy for me to be able to find accommodation. There wasn't a real problem with that. And there wasn't a problem with me moving there. I had spent a lot of time prior to the military. I'd spent 4 years overseas, and I'd traveled. I'd spent 4 years traveling through 56 countries, and I spent a lot of time in very remote areas. I loved it. I had no problems. I should just say to anyone listening that I'm also 6'8" and 250 pounds. So
damn.
The beauty of that is not many people want to fight you.
Right.
Which I'm more than happy to accommodate, but I'm not silly enough to think that I'm able to take on more than one offender at the time. So you do also learn to talk to people.
You're a big dude.
To get them to comply with that. Yes, no, that it has certainly helped. Although I have had previous jobs where I seriously thought my ass was going to get kicked, and fortunately I was able to weasel my way out of it, so it was good.
My roommate in college was 6'8", like 250, big dude. And when you're that big, it's cool. I mean, it's cool because anytime we went to a party or we walked in a room as our little crew of like 5 or 6 guys, when he walked into the room, everybody in the room is kind of like, That's a big dude. Like it's like instant recognition of your size. You know what I mean? And like you said, it can work against you if you get a real scrappy guy who would like nothing better than to take down the big guy. Then it can screw you. But 9 times out of 10, it just stops problems before they happen. Just sheer size.
Oh, look, I would walk into a pub that's you're being called to because there's a fight going on or something, and you'd walk in and the person causing the trouble would turn around and he'd look at my chest and then he'd just look up and with a very drunken voice go, "You're the biggest cop I've ever seen in my life." And I was able to just go, "Shut up," and get in the back of the van, and he'd go, "Okay," and just go.
Don't club me.
And it was perfect. So to give you an idea, we would carry an ass baton, handcuffs, capsicum spray. We'd just have a small capsicum spray, but in the car we would have the party packs, which were the big canisters.
Yeah, like the bear canisters.
I started off with Smith & Wesson Model 10 revolvers with 38 Special. But in the later part of my career, we moved over to Smith & Wesson M&P in 10 cal. So
10 millimeter?
But 10 mil. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Definitely. We did not have any access to high-powered rifles, although only just now is Victoria Police starting to look at M4s.
Really? Out in the bush, you didn't have a high caliber rifle? That seems nuts. I mean, long distances,
Oh, no,
you know what I mean?
Plenty. Yeah, I got plenty in the safe at home.
Right.
That doesn't matter. And here's the thing: although I never ever had to bring it out and use it, so long as you could justify using it, there's nothing to say that you couldn't use it. So if a long arm was necessary, and a lot of the guys that I worked with in the bush were hunters, they would have high-powered rifles. So that was it. But there's only a couple of times that I can ever think, and only one station I was ever stationed at where we had access to, it was Ruger Mini 14s at the time, actually.
That's a nice rifle.
And I'd never seen them ever used before, and the reason why this station had them and no other station in the whole of Victoria did was because there was a factory on the outskirts of town that produced Australia's morphine for the whole of Australia. So that was the only reason they had them. But
that gun probably looked like a toothpick in your hand.
Oh, look, it was great. I can look in 31 years. I think I only had to draw my firearm probably a handful of times, and I never had to use it. So
that's great.
That just goes to show the difference in what you would face on the job.
Right. So, Mark, you are stationed remotely. So how remote is this? Like, describe the area where you were, like, the majority of your career.
Okay. So to give your listeners a bit of an eye go, and I had a little bit of a look on Google. So Connecticut has 94 municipal police departments, and there's 6,500 police officers stationed in the state. I would cover that by myself.
Crazy.
So it would take me up to 3 hours to go to an area. My nearest backup on a good day was an hour away. On a bad day, it was 3 hours away. My nearest 24-hour police station is 3 hours away. The nearest hospital is an hour and a half. The nearest McDonald's is an hour and a half. The remoteness that is involved there. But we are talking about Australia, and Victoria is one of the more popular eastern states. When you look at South Australia and Western Australia, some of the police there just have insane areas to cover. And the single police officer who operates out of Birdsville, which is literally in the middle of a desert, he covers an area the size of Oregon, 84,000 square miles by himself.
So does he get flown? Like, say there's something that needs to be responded to. Would he get flown? Helicopter, plane?
No, four-wheel drive. Four-wheel drive. He's just got a Toyota Land Cruiser that's outfitted, and he'll just jump in that. Some of the guys in the northwest of Western Australia, when they do a patrol, their patrol can last 2 weeks. So they head out in a Land Cruiser with the camping gear and the food, and they literally go around to some of the remote Aboriginal areas, sorting out issues as they go, and then at the end of 2 weeks they would come back again. We would also do that. So our police cars, we had either Toyota Land Cruisers or Nissan Patrol 4-wheel drives. In our area, we had 7 radios. So we would have a UHF radio, a VHF radio, a CB radio, a marine radio, a HF radio. And the HF radio meant that we could talk to virtually anyone in Australia. And there were multiple areas where we were just without communication, and multiple times where I would have to tell radio communications that I'm literally going to be gone. The car radios could double as repeaters. So if we had to go down a valley, we could station the car at the top and then turn on the repeater, and then I would take a portable radio and go down and still be able to get connection out. But in some areas, it was just that there was nothing. There was no mobile phone. A lot of us carried GPS beacons so that if we were in a remote area, we could press a button, and that would allow everyone to give our location to be able to know where we were. But it would take multiple hours to get somebody into that area.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, I worked part-time for a very rural town, and I mean, the numbers you're talking makes it sound silly, but it was like the town's 55 square miles, and 1 cop was on at a time, and we had repeaters in our cruisers. We just didn't have reception. The repeater always worked, and it would link to your portable, just like you're saying. It would be like beep, 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 and then you knew it was connected to the car, and you could get out. But those are incredibly expensive. I mean, this little town purchased one for 1 cruiser. It was $10,000 for the repeater, which for a little town is insane money.
It's only been in the last 5 years that Victoria Police has gone to a digital encrypted radio. Prior to that, anyone with a scanner could listen in. So if I took an hour to get to a job, and this happened to me several times, then radio communications would give me a call and say, for an example, I was going to a job where there was a firearm involved, and we didn't know where the location of that firearm was or what type it was. And then we'd get a radio message come in and say, "Oh, listen, someone was listening on a scanner that knew the guy, so he phoned him, and they've put the gun away, so there's no problems. You can go there."
Solved itself.
And it sort of solved itself. For one job I remember going to with a potential firearm involved, I looked in the rearview mirror as I was driving up to it, and there were 5 cars following me. And they were locals and relatives who'd heard the job on the radio and were coming along to have a bit of a look and see what it was like.
Try to mitigate. He's a good guy. He's a good boy.
He's a good guy. It was
what a nightmare.
It was interesting. We just had to tell, look, everyone just stay in the car, right, until we work out if it's safe or not. Okay. So.
Mark, can you take us way back when you were a young officer to the first call you got that you considered a hot call, first call that got your blood pumping?
Okay. Extremely memorable. As a very young probationary constable, I was in possibly the area of Melbourne which had the highest number of drug addicts and prostitutes. And we got a phone call to an armed robbery at the California Club, which was one of the biggest high-end brothels in Melbourne.
Aptly named.
Now, we were just around the corner from it, but I think in the 30 seconds it took us to get there would have been every police car within a 10-mile radius that were on their way to it. So when we got there, the offenders had already left, but we had to stay, of course, and talk to all the girls that were working there and take statements off them. And it was we got all the other cars to look for the offender's vehicle that was leaving, and we stayed at the brothel. Purely for professional reasons,
of course.
But at the end of the day, we asked if we could have a tour, and the girls showed us all around. And I got to admit, for a young probationary constable, it was certainly eye-opening.
I bet. So brothels are legal there.
Yes, they are, and there is also a fair bit of prostitution, street prostitution. That works in the area, but that is now changing, and they're looking at so brothels are legal, which meant that a lot of the girls that operated on the streets would have a bit of protection. They weren't access to, or they didn't get someone who was going to beat them up or
sure.
Want to do something that they didn't want to do. So it wasn't too bad. They can make a fairly good money out of it.
Wow. So you thought going to that call, you were going to something big. You just ended up touring the whorehouse.
Yes. And then opened up the door, and here's all like about 15 women wearing underwear. And, it was, you're trying to look for someone with a gun.
Yeah.
trying to take your eyes off what was in front of you at the time, which was took a fair bit of effort.
Yeah, that's funny. Can you tell us about a strange or bizarre thing you dealt with on the job?
Oh, I could probably sit here for the next 10 hours and tell you about this, but I think to give you a bit of an idea, I might tell you a story about one of the first country towns I went to. There was a young 8-year-old boy who on his way home from school was stealing lollies. And there's
like
nothing
lollipops?
you can do with an 8-year-old. Yeah, just going into a store and stealing a bag of lollies. There's nothing you can do with an 8-year-old. They're too young to charge with anything.
Right.
All you can do is yell at them. And we'll say they're the Smith family for reference.
Sure.
So little Billy Smith is we've got him by the ear and we're taking him home. And I'd done this several times before. And we pull up at his house. It's about 6:30 at night, dinner time, and you could just imagine it. It's the dilapidated farmhouse. There's 3-foot high grass in the front yard with the rusty car bodies and the front door hanging off the hinges. And I drag him out of the car. I got him by the ear. I walk in, don't bother knocking. And I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. So I stuck my head round the corner, and there was the Jones family sitting at the dinner table. Ma Jones in the middle of them. And I've gone, oh, g'day, Ma. And she looks up and goes, what do you lot want? And I go, well, it's Billy, Ma. We caught him stealing again. I'm looking at this table. There's 6 adults sitting at it. Everyone has food on their plate. One old bloke down the end is eating. Nobody else is touching their food. There's something. I can't put my finger on it. But Billy sticks his head round the corner. Ma squeals at him. You get to bed, I'll deal with you later. The poor kid scampers off, and we kind of finish up and we go, well, look, we're going to go, but if it happens again, straight to prison. you're not going to send an 8-year-old to prison, but you try and get creative.
Sure.
As I turn to leave, the lady sitting next to the old bloke who's eating elbows him and says, "Hurry up, I'm getting hungry." The old bloke goes, "Oh, for crying out loud," opens his mouth, takes out his teeth, passes them to her. She puts them in. That's when it dawns on us, they're all waiting for the teeth.
Oh my gosh. I've never heard of anything like that.
True story.
Wow.
True story.
So they got food on the table, but are impoverished enough where
Yep.
they can't have their own teeth.
Yep.
Man, talk about
So-
something you take for granted, the modern dentistry, you know?
So that's one, and another quick one because it's hilarious. Was my first ever remote country station. I got asked if I could find a place to rent for a few months, and there was this. I got told there's this 100-year-old farmhouse out at a beach, way out the back, and it was $75 a week rent, and I've just gone $75. I'm there. I move out to this place. Now, this house was so old, when the wind blew, the wallpaper used to come out about 2 feet. It had an outdoor toilet and it had a semi-detached shower that was part of a walled-in section of the veranda. So on my first morning, I got to walk naked out the front door because I could. And I would walk into the walled-in section of the veranda and into the bathroom. Now, the shower was one of those enameled cast iron tubs on 4 legs with the wraparound curtain.
Sure.
There was no extractor fan, but it was pushed against the far wall where there was this 4-foot wide lap sash window that you could drop down and the steam would go out. So I worked that out, and I'm in the shower shampooing my hair. What I didn't know was that there was a horse in the paddock next to the shower that heard the water and walked over, and then it looked through the window and it went, "Water. I think I'll have a drink." So it sticks its head through the window and proceeds to drink out of the shower. Now, this is 10 inches in front of my face.
Oh,
I'm
my
completely
gosh.
oblivious to it.
Never
because
feel
my
more
eyes are
vulnerable
closed
than when you're
because
washing your
I'm
hair.
shampooing. So then the horse turns around, looks at me, and obviously thinks to itself, "Gee, I wonder what that white stuff tastes like." Let me tell you, getting licked in the face by a horse whilst naked in a shower is exciting.
I would jump 10 feet.
In fact, it's so exciting, it bears detail. The lick goes in, and with the tongue pretty much still attached, your eyes open. And in a split second before the suds hit them, the only thing you focus on is this massive set of teeth 6 inches in front of your face. And a horse is not the first thing that comes to mind, seeing as you're naked in the shower. But the first thing that does come to mind is the monster from the movie Aliens.
Yeah.
So you exit the shower, taking the rod and the curtain with you. I exited so fast I hit the far wall. How I never killed myself is beyond me. But after that, I got used to the horse's face. Occasionally, I'd shampoo the horse's face as well. So the only problem with living out there was the rent. So I got young John to move in with me. He was another young constable from the station. He just moved to town. So on John's first morning, he's sitting in the kitchen having a cup of coffee when he looks up and sees me walk naked past him out the front door. So his head comes around the corner and he goes, "Trig, where are you going?" And I went, "Shower." And then he looks at me and he says, "Why do you have a large carrot in your hand?" And I thought that was a fair question. So I said, I often shower with a carrot. And then he starts to look worried. And he goes, and what do you do with a carrot in the shower? I've gone, "You'll find out soon enough." So a couple of hours later, he has a shower, meets the horse, and in a couple of weeks, we were both showering with carrots. So that was my first introduction to remote country policing.
Oh my gosh. So you're doing this remote country policing as a single guy? How old are you at this point?
So at the moment, I'm 63 years of age. So when I first moved, I was single, and then at my second station, I met a really nice young lass who I'd known through a mutual friend, and we wound up getting married. And I now have three daughters.
Oh,
They're 21, 20, and 17. So
fantastic.
three girls, and
God bless you.
all of them now are in Melbourne though at school or university. So
Hear that, bush
that's
cops?
that's
You can meet a nice lady and have a family and still work in the bush.
very very much so. It's what's interesting though is that when you become a policeman, so does your wife, and she would get asked all the time for all the gossip about what happened, and no one would ever believe her when she said, "Look, I don't get told a lot about what happened because you have to be uh, when you're a remote country police officer, you know everybody's dirty little secrets,
Yeah.
but you can't tell anyone about that because it's
Fly
just
around the
unprofessional."
village. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, you're probably
the
you're a bit of a local celebrity. I mean, you know what I mean? Like everybody knows who you are. They know that you're dealing with
yes.
everybody's stuff, so you got to be a little bit careful.
So it's interesting, and it was a little bit interesting when I was writing my memoir because even though I haven't put any names, dates, locations, or times in, if anyone were to read any of the stories that happened to me, and they would know who it was.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but the you can only really get in trouble for defamation, and if what you're writing about is true, then there's not much anyone can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty much the same here in the States. Same idea. That's crazy. So did she, like if you're at home and you're like a bush cop and you're off duty, you're not on shift. I mean, you can get called out at any time, right? You're the only guy around. So would they just call your house?
So normally you would work on a you would work on availability. So availability wasn't a lot. It was only a few dollars an hour, but it meant that you wouldn't be having anything to drink, and that you would stay by a phone, and that if something serious happened, you would uh, just you would and this only happened in when if you're in the city, when you knock off for the shift, you hand your firearm back. You leave your equipment belt and your vest in your locker.
Oh, it's like Canada.
But
They
in the
do the same
country,
thing.
yeah, in the country though, if you're on availability, you would take everything home. So I've got a safe at home that I would just stick everything in, and then if I got a phone call and I was called out, I could just jump up, throw it on. You would take the police car home with you, and then you would just jump in the car and you would head off. So that was pretty easy.
I don't understand the police officers leaving their guns at home. What is the thought process behind that? I mean, leaving their guns at the station. Because I'm guessing statistically, if you looked at it, police officers don't commit gun violence off duty with their guns. It's a very minuscule percentage. So, what is the benefit to anyone for a police officer not to bring their gun home?
Um, the benefit I think is from a department viewpoint is security and control. We don't want everyone would have to go do. The department have to provide you with a safe to keep it in, or should that be your own responsibility? If you can get permission to take your firearm home if you're not on call, but only that's Chief Commissioner writes that. So say you're getting death threats from a bikie gang or something, then yes, you can take your firearm home. So it's not generally considered necessary, but what happens is situations can occur, and I had one where it was very touch and go, where I had to attend a job, and I basically went to it dressed in my pajamas, and I was asleep uh, at night, and I got a phone call from the local publican, and he said, "Can I please come up to the pub? There's three guys, and they're beating a woman to death."
Is a publican like a bar owner?
A bar owner, yes. So
Okay.
the publican is the bar owner, and he said, "Can you please come up to the local pub," which was only about 500 metres away from where I was living at the time. He said, "There's three guys, and they're beating a woman up out the front." And I said, "Look, I'm not on call. Have you phoned 000, which is 911 in Australia?" And they said, "Yes, but it's Mick. He's coming from Can River, which is 45 minutes away if you're going as fast as you can."
Oh boy.
And and he said, "Look, I think they're going to kill her." And why do you say that? "Well, she's lying on the ground and all three are stomping on her." So I said, "Okay, I'll come up." I've phoned the board, which is communications, to say, is Mick going to this job? And they said, "Yes, he is." And I said, "Well, do you want me to go?" And they said, "Well, look, we can't call you out because you're not on call." And I said, "But it sounds serious. I tell you what, I'll go up and I'll have a look and I'll give you a call and let you know if it's as serious as what I've been told." So I jump in the Magna in my pajamas and toddle up to the pub. And as I come round the corner into the main driveway just outside the bar, here's three huge guys, and lying at their feet was this woman covered in blood. And as my headlights illuminate her, she reaches out towards me and cries, "Help," and then just collapses. And I'm like, "Oh." So I get out of the car, and these three guys start walking over towards me. Now, one's about 6'2". He's got a bald head, bare-chested Nazi swastika on his left breast. Another guy is my size. I'd never seen these guys before in my life. Outweighed me by 20 kilo. And then the third guy was over 6 foot as well. And I'm sitting here thinking, three guys, I think I'm about to get my ass kicked.
Yeah.
But I couldn't really leave the girl.
Right.
But back in those days, I was still teaching martial arts. And on the back seat of the Magna was my martial arts training bag, and sitting on the top was a wooden samurai sword. So I grabbed that and wandered over and said, "G'day, guys, what's going on?" And they asked who I was, and I said, "I'm the local policeman." Now, I told them that because I hoped that by telling them I was a local police, that would mitigate their
Do something.
response.
Yeah.
It had the opposite effect. And they all started sort of getting a bit closer, and I said, "So what's with the girl?" And they said, "We're trying to help her." I felt like asking into what hospital. And whilst I'm talking to them, the girl's crawled over to me, and she's latched onto my leg, and she had blood mixed in with the mascara, and she was cut and scratched and bruised and crying. And she said they choked me, they kicked me, they punched me. And then the guy with the Nazi swastika moves in. So I pushed her over, pulled out the sword and said, "You just sit over there by the curb, and we'll wait for the other police officer to get here." And he keeps coming. And I went, "Okay, let me put it another way. Take another step, and I'm going to start using this." And he puts his hand up and backs off, and I've gone, great, 20 minutes before Mick gets here. And then the big guy moved in, and he kept coming, and I said, "Look, mate, I'm not joking. I will use this if you come any closer." And by that stage, all three had started to sort of come around the sides. And by this stage, my adrenaline was just skyrocketing. I think my heart rate would have been up around 200. And I knew this was not going to end well. And he said, "You're not good enough," took a swing. And I ducked under the swing and then just dropped with full body weight into a cut and hit him halfway along his thigh, up his outer thigh. And I just heard this massive snap and he hit the ground screaming. And I thought that I'd broke his femur. And he's on the ground screaming. You've broken my leg. I'm going to sue. I went, "Shut up." The other two guys went to water. 12 guys pulled out of the pub after it was over. None of them. What
does went to water mean, Mark?
They just, I said,
collapsed.
"Go sit over there," and they went, "Yeah, sure, okay." They just collapsed and went over there. That generally happens when you've got a group of people and you pick the biggest, meanest looking guy there. If you can knock him down with one hit, generally everybody else just goes to water.
Damn, and, that's crazy.
Yeah, they just go, "Uh-oh."
Yeah,
maybe we won't attack. So that happened, and the funny part was the ambulance officer, when he arrived, who was a good friend of mine at the time, and he said he's just got this image of pulling up with this guy lying on the ground screaming, and me standing there wearing pajamas with a samurai sword out the front of me, and he walks up and points to the guy who's screaming and goes, "What happened to him?" And I go, "Oh, I hit him with this." And he goes, "Is he all right?" I go, "I don't know. He hasn't moved since I hit him." So, but he got up and hobbled off afterwards. So I knew that I hadn't fractured his femur. But I looked at it's called a bokken, and the wooden samurai sword is made out of white oak. It's a very hard wood, and I'd split it. I hit him that hard. So It turns out they were 3 neo-Nazis just out of prison from the neighbouring state. They'd come down to Victoria to celebrate, and the girl who was with them was getting a bit worried about how they were acting, and she wanted to drive off in the car and wouldn't let them in. So they had one had held her down, stood on her throat, and the other had kicked her between the legs. I think she ruptured a spleen, but she lived and came back a couple of weeks later to be able to thank me, which was really good.
Wow, that's intense. And this, did you say this was in the city, or was this in the bush?
Oh no, this was. It took another half hour for the next available policeman to.
So, okay, yeah, right. So this was the bush.
Yeah. So this was absolutely remote country area. So
why you didn't bring your gun because you weren't sent to that? Is that why?
No, I didn't have a gun with me. I wasn't on call, so I didn't come back. I had nothing. All I had was my pajamas.
Oh, so when you're not on call in the bush, you have to turn your gun in.
You don't get anything. No, yeah. You've got to leave your firearm at the station and all.
See, you could have got all 3 of them if you had the gun. You know, just bang, bang, bang.
Look, that.
Wow.
And I didn't know how bad it was until I actually got there. And by the time I got there, I realised I just couldn't leave the girl.
Yeah, you had to do something.
You see, it's weird when you take an oath as a policeman. That oath binds you to act when you're called upon, or when circumstances demand such action.
Absolutely.
The decision to act is easy, and the question you ask yourself is, how would I react if it were my loved ones involved? How would I want others to act?
Yeah.
So that's what happened. But
God bless you, Mark. You got brass cojones, my friend. You said your heart rate was 200. You must have been freaking out. Especially for you, because you're used to being the biggest dude. All of a sudden, it's like that's out the window too. It's like that. Now I don't even have that on my side.
And we had look, there were 26 years. I got to admit, there were multiple situations that I went to that were dangerous. Most of the time I was able to. There were very few. There were a couple that I went to that were actually worse than that. the one that gave me post-trauma was I got a phone call to a 150 kilo person who had a psychotic breakdown, and he'd gone off his meds and was attempting suicide. He'd covered him and me in petrol. He had me in one arm and a 20-litre jerry can in the other, and we were a metre away from a campfire, and he was trying to drag me into it. And that was a fight for my life. That was. I might as well tell you the humorous police version of that. I get called to a man acting strangely, and in my hometown, that happened a fair bit. So I pull up at an address that I hadn't been to before, and there was a boat on a trailer, there was a lit campfire, there was two sheds knocked together. And as I get out of the car and close the door, I could hear howling, but it wasn't a dog. So I thought, well, rather than just go through, I might just skirt around the outsides and just see what I'm getting myself in for. So I look around the corner, and here's this 150 kilo guy with his pants down around his ankles, standing on the roof of his Mercedes, howling. But he doesn't have any weapons. He's just howling. So I wander over and lean onto the bonnet of the car, and I look up and I go, "G'day, mate." And he looks at me, and his eyes are just spinning in circles. And I go, "How's about you slide off and put the kettle on? I love what you've done to the property." And he looks at me and he goes, "All right." So he pulls up his pants, he slides off, he goes in, he makes me a cup of tea. I am styling. So I'm sitting there and I got my cup of tea and I go, "So what's on the agenda for today?" And he goes, "I'm going to kill myself." And I went, "Okay." And then he looks at me and he says, "Are you watching?" And I went, "Do I have to?" And he leans over, took a dog collar off the side of the wall, wrapped it round his throat and commenced to strangle himself in front of me. So I'm sitting on the other side of the table with my cup of tea, and he's turning purple, his spittle's coming out his eyes, his eyes spinning round. So I took a sip and looked at him and said, "Have you got any sugar?" He stopped, found me the sugar bowl, slid it over to me, and then went back to strangling himself. So I said, "Okay, love your enthusiasm. It's not going to work. Don't go away. We really do need to go down and have a little chat to the doctor, because when someone's like this, you can arrest them and take them to a doctor because obviously he's not himself."
We call it a Section 12
So,
in Massachusetts.
yes. So I went up to the back of the police car, opened up the rear, and in the back we have a prisoner pod, but one of the guys had left a chainsaw in it, and I thought maybe that's not the best idea to leave that there.
Whoops.
And put him in. Yeah. So I put that in the back of the car and turned around. He'd followed me out. He'd gone to the back of the boat where there was a 20-litre jerry can of petrol, and he lifted it up, was pouring it onto him, and then he was walking towards the campfire carrying the jerry can, and I went, "Oh, okay." And I'm sprinting towards him to get to him before he got to the fire, but it was close. And when I grabbed him, I grabbed his shirt and pulled, and the buttons popped off, and it flicked petrol back on my glasses down the front of my uniform. And we were only a pace away from the fire. And I grabbed his wrist and said, "What are you doing?" As if it wasn't obvious. He starts pulling me towards the fire. I start pulling him away from the fire. And this is when I found out he was stronger than me. So we start tussling, and he dropped the jerry can, and the whole world went into slow motion. The jerry can was dropping literally like in slow motion, and it hit the ground and stayed upright. And I just thought, that is just so lucky. And as I'm looking at it, he reaches over with his other hand and grabs me, and now he's pulling me, and now all professionalism's gone. He's screaming, I'm screaming. I've got images of my 5-year-old going through my head at the time. And at the last second, when I didn't know what I was or how I was going to get out of this, because if I let him go and he fell against the jerry can into the fire and 20 litres of petrol went up, I wouldn't be able to dive out the way in time. So he slipped, went down on one knee, one hand came off, and I managed to throw him with his wrist, and I got him airborne and rolled him over, handcuffed him, and it was over.
Whew.
Probably only lasted 15, 20 seconds, in actuality, but it
Right.
felt like forever. And I had to get two neighbours to help me drag him and lift him into the back of the car. And a couple of about 3 days later, he got taken to a psych ward. And 3 days later, I phoned up to find out how he was. And they said, "Oh, yeah, he's good, he's gone." And I went, "You let him out?"
Oh,
And
jeez.
they went, "Yes." And I've gone, "Tell me he's not coming back to my town." And they go, no, gone to Melbourne to recuperate. I went, "Oh, great. Recuperate from all the drugs you gave him,"
Yeah.
right? They
Good
went, "No,
place
from the
for him.
surgery."
See you later.
Yeah. And they said, "No, from the surgery." And I took a bit of a pause and I went, "Surgery? What surgery?" And they said, "Oh, we found his arm broken in 3 places." And I went, "Left arm or right arm?" And they went, "Left arm." And I went, "Uh-oh.
Whoops.
Does he happen to remember how that happened?" And they go, "No, psychotic breakdown. He can't remember a thing." And I'm like, "Oh, well, so sad. Too bad. Bye." And hung up.
Lose my number.
And about 4 weeks later, I'm sitting in the police station and I look up and he walks in with his whole family in tow and says, "Look, I want to thank you for what you did. Um, I, I can't remember a thing. Can you fill in the blanks?" To which point I think I replied, "Some of them." And but he was happy, and that was good. But I got to admit that 15-second, 20-second struggle of me thinking I'm going to get pulled into a fire with a 20-litre jerry can and lit up was that was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. Damn.
And
And then you don't have
yeah.
you don't have like a fire department around the corner either. It'd be on you to
No.
smear your
The
face
fire
in the dirt.
department. No, fire department is volunteer only. So you have to, the siren has to go off, and then you got to wait for someone to arrive at the station. It can take good 10, 15 minutes before they're ready to go anywhere. So yeah, him and I would have been dead by then for sure. But it was just, it's really good. I still see him occasionally. He's not a bad bloke actually. He just had a psychotic breakdown, went off his meds, and
Yeah, had a bad
that was
one.
it.
Damn. Yeah, I just interviewed a guy who, he was showed up to a call and he was taking fire from a guy who was in Vietnam. He was a sniper in Vietnam. The guy lit up his cruiser, shot all around him. He's lying on the ground. The neighbors are calling in, there's a cop dead. Then another cop showed up. He took cover. There's 2 cops dead. The guy had a psychotic break. He wasn't trying to kill him. He just felt like going out with his AR-15 and shooting. He goes, "If I wanted to kill you, you'd be dead." He shot up their cars. He shot all around them, never hit one of them. And same thing. He goes, guy had a psychotic break, gets taken away on, a mental health order. He goes, 2 weeks later,
Yeah.
I'm in the local convenience store buying a snack, and the guy walks in. He goes, "Yeah, he's already out." He goes, "Hey, listen, I'm really sorry about the whole thing, but if you want to come over to my house for a beer, I'd love to give you one." And he's like, I'm good. I'm all set." Damn. Mark, that is crazy. So can you tell us about your most intense call that you dealt with for Victoria Police?
Look, that would probably be that would probably be the most intense. I think the one that I've just given you, but to give you an idea of how different types of things range, this was and this is when you're working on the coast, you get to work with both fisheries officers. And you also get to do a bit of work in the ocean. So, and this was a a job that just goes to show you how versatile you have to be. So we got a phone call of a crayfish or a lobster fisherman, I think would be best to say that. And there'd been a captain on a small boat and the guy who throws the lobster pots overboard, but he hadn't looked down and his foot was caught in a loop of rope and it just pulled him straight overboard, straight down 80 fathoms. And by the time the captain came back to drag him up, he wasn't breathing. So we got the phone call to the job, but the captain was so upset, we didn't know if the guy was still alive or not. Now, not every police station that operates on the coast has access to a boat. So we would just go down and we asked one of the local fishermen if he could take us out. So me and my partner at the time jumped in the boat. We went out. But when we got outside, the seas were huge. There was a massive swell running. And we couldn't get close enough to the boat to be able to determine if the guy was still alive or not. And the captain was just crying his eyes out, and we couldn't make sense on the radio as to what we're doing. So we carried a bag of where I kept a wetsuit in it. So I jumped out of my uniform, jumped in the wetsuit, and came up with the idea that I would dive overboard and swim to the other boat and get on board.
Oh my gosh!
So it was only after I dived over on the water that the thought of sharks entered my mind. So I had about a
Australia, great whites everywhere.
To get to the boat, and whilst at the bottom of the boat, I'm looking at it going, well, this is really good. How am I going to get up? But there's a thing called a pot thrower that sits on the outside of the gunnel, and it was coming down almost to sea level because the swell was so huge. So I said, well, what I'll do is I'll grab that, and then I can ride up the boat when it goes up, and then I'll throw a leg over.
You're crazy.
And then ride it down and get myself on board. So that was the plan. And everyone knows that plans start off really good. So I grab hold of this pot and I get launched into the air, but suddenly it just pitched down. So my legs then went up, and I'm now doing a handstand on the top of the pot thrower, and the boat goes down, and I'm now falling headfirst onto the deck.
Ooh.
And sitting in the deck at the time was the bucket of bait that was full of rotting barracuda heads. Ugh. And my entire head disappeared into the bait bucket.
Ugh.
I then fell off onto the body, and I was just spitting and snorting bits of rotten fish out of my mouth and wiping my mouth. And so I'm trying to check this guy, and he's not breathing. So I said, well, I better start doing CPR on him. So trying to do CPR just after your head has been submerged in a bucket of rotting fish on a boat that's going over 16-foot swells, with your head down, trying to stop yourself from vomiting is virtually impossible. So I'm trying to time my vomit and subsequent dry reaching with not into the mouth of the guy whose life I'm trying to save. But it took us half an hour to get back to port. By that stage, I was green, and I'd spewed up like about 15 times by then, and trying to and all my vomit was on the deck that made the deck slippery. So I'm trying to hold this, and then the ambos came on board and we got him off, and they spent another 3/4 of an hour trying to get his heart going again, but they couldn't do it. And
damn.
The only sympathy I got from my partner was when I got out and I was literally in a wetsuit covered with rotting fish and vomit, was he just looked at me and screwed up his nose and goes, "You stink." And
You're not riding home with me.
no, I got told to get in the back of the van.
Oh my gosh! What did the guy? Was it an overdose or heart attack or what? Do you ever find out?
No. So the
Oh,
so
he
what
went under.
happened
He went
was,
under.
so he got pulled over and got dragged down 80 feet
Right, he
by the
drowned.
rope because the lobster pots weigh about 200 pounds, so they're very heavy, and he couldn't stop himself from being pulled over. But by the time the boat did a U-turn, came back, threw the grappling hook to the float, got it onto the winch, and pulled him up, he'd stopped breathing.
Right.
So
I'd forgotten about that part with all the
yeah,
imagery of the vomit and the bait bucket.
and the bait bucket, yes. So yeah, that just goes to show you one of the jobs that just did not turn out to be a day's shift that I thought would turn out like.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're in a position in an area like that where, like you said, you take an oath to help and to do good and to, try to save people, and you literally are in a lot of situations the only guy wearing that hat. You don't have other services that step in and go, nope, this is my specialty. I'm a firefighter. I'm EMS. I took my oath. You're the guy. So, you're putting a wetsuit on. You're swimming out to a fishing boat. You're doing mouth to mouth on this guy. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's something that I don't think people think of you just as police of, say, booking cars for speeding or something like that. When it's not, it's searching for hikers that go lost in a national park area, and you'll always guarantee that when someone phones you to say, "Can you come and get me?" they will have 1% on their mobile phone,
Always.
and
Yeah.
not know where they are.
Yeah.
So you're trying to say, well, can you see a lighthouse from where you are? Can you see a hilltop from where you are? And you're trying to triangulate on a map to work out exactly what happened or where they are to be able to send someone to be able to go in and to do that. But the beauty of it is that when you go into an area in remote country, because there's not a lot of work every day, you can spend the time to explore your entire area. So every four-wheel drive track, every remote farm, you'll go up, introduce yourself to the owner, and that way they know you, you know them, and it makes for an easy transition. If you're heading up to an area where you know somebody is, you can phone
Yeah.
the
Then they
farm
help
next
you.
door and ask if
Yeah.
you can see them. Yes, and so if you ever get your police car bogged and you can't winch your way out, you can always phone up the local farmer to come get you in his tractor.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I've had that where I work. I've had a farmer come out and clear a state road of a fallen tree because the power company was going to be an hour and a half. And he said, "Hey, want me to do it with my tractor?" And I said, "I'd love that if you did it with your tractor." And he just came out and took care of it. Oh, that's great, Mark. I mean, in the truest sense of the word, you're a community caretaker in every single aspect of it when you're out there. You're the guy. That's very cool.
It's there's you're not so much police officer, but more social worker as well, especially when you go to a domestic situation where they could be recidivist, where you know them, you know their problems, you know the issues that come into it. So that's really good because it allows you to, if someone's, if the husband's left and he's mad or something, you'll have his mobile number. You'll be able to
Right.
give him a call and just get his side of the story, find out what's happened, arrange for him to spend a night at a mate's place or something like that. So you don't have to. Um, uh, a lot of it's interesting when we did training for defensive tactics or something like that. Uh, it was often interesting because you would have the instructors saying, well, you have somebody here who say they've barricaded themselves into this house with a firearm, and where would you put your units to cordon and contain them? And you would just look at them and go, what units? And
Right.
they'd say, well, how would you handle it? And I said, well, I'd probably know him, so I'd just give him a call and tell him to put down the gun and come into the police station. I'll put the kettle on and we'll discuss it and work out his problem for him. So
Right. I love it. Yeah.
yeah, you don't have to worry about.
Yeah. You don't have to spend all the time searching for people, getting the dogs out there and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
No, don't need that at all.
Yeah. It's a whole different style. It's very cool, Mark. Can you tell us about a heartwarming call or job, as you say, from your career?
A heartwarming job, that would be what would be a really good heartwarming. Again, I can probably it's not so much picking one out of one. I can pick out of several dozen, but
You have to pick the best one.
Okay, then. This is one that is really and would probably make a lot of police in America scratching their heads. So, the coastal country areas of Victoria during Christmas periods just have no accommodation whatsoever. They are just booked out solid months in advance. So one night I was working and knocking off at midnight, and as I've walked out of the station to take the police car home because I was on call that night, this carload of elderly Greek tourists rolls up, and they're in their 70s. And they've got out of the car and wandered over, and they said, "Listen, we're trying to find accommodation. Can you know of anywhere we can rent accommodation for tonight?" And I said, "No, there is nothing. There is no accommodation whatsoever. It was all booked out months in advance. There's nothing we can do about it. By the end of August, accommodation is booked out in the town that I was in for Christmas." And they were looking a little bit disconcerted. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And they said, "Well, we're just going to have to stay in the car because there's nothing here." But my wife and I operated a Airbnb and at the time, and downstairs we had a couple of sofa beds. So I couldn't really let them just sleep in the car in their 70s. It was crazy. And I said, "Oh, well, listen, you can come home with me." So follow me. And on the way, I've called my wife, who was kind of used to this actually, and said, "Listen, can you make up the sofa beds downstairs because we've got two elderly Greek tourists who can't find accommodation coming back to spend the night." And so anyway, they thought this was just fantastic.
I bet
they
the local cop takes them home.
So they had a thing, and then the next morning they got up and came up, and we had breakfast with them, and they were talking about how they'd come over from Athens and were visiting relatives and thought they'd take a drive down and didn't think there'd be a problem. And then as I'm leaving, they said, we went out to their car to wish them, all the best. And suddenly the old guy walks over to the car and he lifts up the boot at the back, and inside was just full of salamis and dolmades and Greek charcuterie with all sorts of olives and food and bottles of Retsina, and he just starts pulling it out of the car and handing it to me. And like my wife's just got got half a dozen salamis in her hand, and and he's just pulling them out, and he's going, "This is for you, you good boy." And so that was that. I got to admit, that was a really nice feel-good thing that you could do to somebody, and completely and utterly outside of, I guess, what. Because could I ask, have you ever done the same?
I've not. When you were telling that story, I have come close one time, and it didn't end up having to happen because I'm a Christian guy and Christian family, and what you're talking about there really hits home to me. Where helping people who need help, helping people in need, not necessarily in an emergency, but like you're supposed to help. Love your neighbor. So I did have a situation once where a young mom and her child didn't have a place to go, wasn't the best circumstance, and she wasn't in the best. The problem with the whole thing was she wasn't in the best headspace, if you know what I mean. She was,
Yep.
But sitting with her in the office for hours, finding nowhere, and it's 25 degrees, says, well, we'll have to stay in the car. And I'm like, well, you have a 3-year-old, so you can't do that. And if you did do that, then we would have to get social services involved because you can't stay in a car with a 3-year-old. You know what I mean? So I did. That's the closest I came. And I told my wife later, I said, you almost got a call from me to say, get the cots out, because I can't do it. She's got to have somewhere to go with this baby.
She's got to have somewhere to go, yeah.
So we did end up getting her a room to stay in, and everything was fine. So that was the closest I came to it. But I love the story, and I think it's great. I think that's like that to me. That's like Americana rural policing. That's like what cops would do. You know what I mean? That's very cool. I love it. Very, very good, heartwarming story.
It's great. I got to admit, I did, for some unknown reason, have my fair share of completely and utterly bizarre jobs that most people would just shook their heads over, and just said that it was just like jobs that other police I've spoken to had never had jobs along those lines before. And I don't know what it was. I just had this innate ability to find myself in situations that were just as bizarre, and like the family that shared their teeth. Great example.
Yeah.
It's just not something that you just got every day, nor would you want to. It was
so cool.
The best part was actually going back and telling the guys at the station.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Mark, you had a hell of a career, man. I loved your stories, brother. Really important question for the show, for a lot of people that listen, and all over the world actually that listen, is advice. What advice would you give to the young, Australian person thinking about getting the police service, or anywhere really? What advice would you give to a young prospect getting into policing?
It's a lot of police are resilient. Police and military are resilient to post-trauma. They wouldn't be in that type of job unless they were. So attending accidents where there are dead bodies or body parts,
Yep.
if you believe that is going to affect you, then a career in policing is probably not for you. The other thing that I highly recommend is that the defensive tactics and firearms practice that you get is really quite minimal. It's the minimum that a department want. So for your own safety, I would say learn a martial art outside of work and do, I would say, practical pistol shooting,
Yeah.
because that will go such a huge way to helping you, and to also not, if you are confident in your own unarmed and armed abilities, then that makes a huge difference when you're working on the job. So what you would do, and if you are wondering which type of martial art, I've done several throughout the years. I've trained and taught in the Philippines, in Japan, in Australia, in Brazil, but uh, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is probably the most effective martial art I've ever done. And the reason is because I've yet to handcuff someone that didn't want to be handcuffed, and I haven't wound up on the ground with him. So learning to fight on the ground is absolutely mandatory in my opinion. So yeah, I would say those. I would say those two things.
Words of wisdom. Good stuff. Thank you, Mark. And backup is 3 hours away. Your book. Where can people get that?
So it's Big Sky Publishing going to be doing it, and it'll be coming out in June this year. I'm still at the moment at selecting like a front cover for it, and working. I'm still getting people to review it. So a lot of the stories that I've told you today are in it. It's 60 bite-size chapters, and it's everything from strange things that happened to me when I wasn't. So it's a true crime memoir about living in remote country Australia, and the types of jobs that I had and what was it like raising a family when I was there, plus all the absolutely weird and wonderful things that happened to me, including post-trauma. I was injured quite badly throughout my career. I broke my back, my knee, my shoulder, my elbow, 2 bouts of post-trauma, and I got shot. Fortunately, I came out of it
You got shot. How did we
intact.
not hear about that, Mark?
Oh, no, sorry, it's just another one. Okay, so quickly, I would like to say that it was an incredible shootout, but no. Uh, the good news was that it was another policeman that accidentally shot me.
Oh
The
no.
bad news was that he shot me in the face, which I wasn't too happy about.
Wasn't a 10 millimeter, was it?
So no, it was a 38 special, and it was a ricochet at the training range.
Oh wow.
So a sergeant was 5 meters to my right. We were 5 meters from the target. He fired, missed the target. The bullet impacted a 1 inch steel plate, ricocheted clean back. Still had 124 grains in the lead, and it went in here, just a ridge, an inch down from the ridge line of my nose, travelled up my
Whoa.
nasal cavity, impacted the cartilage between my eyes, and stopped.
Oh my gosh.
Um, the surgeon said an inch in any other direction, and yeah, I would have been, I wouldn't have made it past there. But
Good
I've
thing you got that
had
big 6'8"
three.
cranium.
Well, as my colleagues want to point out, had I been normal height, the bullet would have gone clean over my head.
This is kind of your fault, really.
Yes. So that was it. But I've had three
Damn.
operations on that, and I possibly need a fourth as well. But
Damn.
it was look. I went down like a sack. It was as if someone had hit me in the face with a baseball bat, and blood just went in everywhere. And they didn't know what had happened, and it wasn't until they took a CT scan of me that they realised that the bullet was lodged between my eyes, basically. So my wife was offered a helicopter ride up to see me, but I managed to talk to her before I went into surgery. So
Wow.
she was able to do that. So yeah,
That's crazy.
But, there's a couple of other things, but when the book comes out, I'll let you know.
Oh, Mark. So what we'll do is I'll go back and I will add the link to the book to this episode. When it comes out, because this will be in the lineup forever, so it's evergreen. People love hearing these stories. They'll be listening to you for years to come. I will add the link when it comes out. And let me know when it comes out, and I can do a post on the Facebook page or whatever and kind of announce it. And also, could have you back. Tell some more bush stories, from the book and, down the road. That'd be great if you're willing.
Not a problem at all. Would love to. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I'll also send you up a link to a YouTube video on a news article that came out, which I'm sure you will find interesting. So
yeah, please do.
I'll do that, and I'll run that through as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great talking to you, and I feel honoured being your inaugural Australian.
Yes, it was an honor to have you, sir. And am I saying your last name correctly? Tregellas?
Tregellas, yep.
Tregellas. Okay.
It's a hard one. It's everybody thinks Greek, but it's Cornish from Cornwall in England. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That was my history. Yeah.
Well, brother, honor to have you. Like I said, I'm going to do the outro. Can you hang on just like 3 minutes and I get back with you?
Can do. Not a problem.
All right. The great Mark Tregellas, fascinating. Was everything I thought it would be. So fun to hear about what Australian police are doing, especially out in the bush. The guy was responsible for everything. He's got multiple hats he had to wear. So cool. So thank you, Mark, for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really, really appreciate you. And most of all, I really appreciate the Patreon sergeants. Who I'm talking about is Sheriff Ron, Ossifer Andy, Adam McMahon, the great Clark Lockoff, the great Nancy Hammond, Zach Haney, everybody, Brad Thompson, Kyle Roberts, the great Jace Crow, everyone, Christian, the great Elliot Sykes, Dave Ellman, everybody, Richard Tolles, keep on trucking, brother, be safe out there, Doug and Kelly Newman, love you guys, see you at church, the great Dan Carlson from Burley Boys, check him out, amazing woodwork, Scott Young, Wayne M. Mill, retired ATF and author, the great Thomas Connell, Dennis Carrasquillo, everyone. George Tessier, I'll see you at church, brother. Iceman from Motocrop Chronicles, check out his podcast. Greg Gadboy, the great Ben Peters, Scott Minkler, Tammy Walsh, hold it down at dispatch. Sean Clifford, Sasha McNabb, the great Mike Wynn, everyone. Jason Lau, Lauren Stimson, Jake Pinino, John Shoemaker, James Rose, the great Seth Wright, the one and only Tony Fahey, William James Long, that's Deputy William James Long to you, the great and gigantic Andy Biggs, Chris June, the great Adam Mihal, Gary Steiner, my man, and the handsome Lane Campbell. Woo! Guys, thank you so much for supporting the show, keeping the lights on, paying for all the bills. I truly appreciate it, and I will see everybody next week.